Good evening, everyone. My name is Kara Solomon, and I'm a conservation coordinator for the North Carolina Wildlife Federation. This evening, I am here with one of our community wildlife chapters, the South Wake Conservationists, and we're joining you tonight virtually. So as you join, please make sure that your camera is off, your microphone is on mute, because we're doing this as a meeting. So go ahead and turn off your camera and mute. Thank you very much. I will be your moderator this evening, so if you have any questions for our speaker tonight, you can type your questions into the chat or raise your hand. Prefer to put it in the chat if you can. So the chat feature's at the bottom, so as you are thinking and listening, feel free to put your questions in the chat. We'll try to make this a little more interactive, so if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We don't have the Q&A feature for this one, so that's how we will answer your questions. If there are questions at the end, we will save some time to make sure that we get to those. So we'll do some Q&A at the end as well. So again, put your Q&A questions in the chat. We can also do raise hand if you want to ask your question as well. So special for tonight, if you are a licensed landscape architect and would like your professional education credit for attending this presentation, please put your name, your email, and your license number in the chat, and we'll record your attendance tonight. So I'll put that in the chat as well. But again, that's your name, your email, and your license number, and we will make sure that you get credit for attending tonight's presentation. This has not yet been approved by NCPOLA, but we're expecting that very shortly. And so now I will hand it over to the president of the South Wake Conservationist chapter, Monty Murray, to talk about some more upcoming chapter events. Thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you, Kara, and good evening, everybody. And I see we have a pretty large audience tonight, which we're pretty excited about. And 1, 2, 3, 7 states are represented here. I see Virginia, South Carolina, South Dakota, Texas, Colorado, and New York, in addition to North Carolina. So that's pretty cool. Welcome, everybody. Tonight, we're going to have a really interesting topic, which I'll introduce in just a moment. First, I'd like to give you a few updates for the people in the Raleigh area, just things that are coming up locally, just to make sure everybody's aware of it, and hopefully sign up to join us. And then we'll turn it over to our speaker. So I am Monty Murray. I'm with the South Wake Conservationists. So we're located in the southern part of Wake County. We cover basically Raleigh and points south, pretty much. And, our mission is to conserve and improve wildlife habitat and diversity through conservation projects and public outreach. These kinds of webinars are another form of public outreach because it's all about connecting with people and connecting people with nature. That's what we're trying to do. We have a number of events coming up. This is a busy month. It seems like I say this every month. I guess it's true. This is another busy month. We have a wildlife trivia night. Some of the other chapters have been holding these very successfully, and we thought we'd give it a try. So this is our first time to do a wildlife trivia. So we're doing it at the Black Dog Bottle Shop in Holly Springs, and that's on August 15th. So if you're in the area, should be a lot of fun. Please come. And we also are going to participate the very next morning in Mud Day, which is a really cool event that's held at the Walnut Creek Wetland Park on the south side of Raleigh. And that's a park that we have partnered with, and we do a lot of invasive removals and native plantings, and it's a pretty strong relationship with that park. So we're excited to participate in that one. The kids get muddy. Our exhibit is not involving mud, but there's mud nearby. That's on August 16th. On the 19th, we're going to do an invasive removal workday, and that'll be at the Apex Community Park. And so that's August 19th. And then on the 23rd, we will have Moth Night. And we've done this for several years now, and it's been a pretty popular event. It's open to all ages. Kids love it. But so do the adults. So it's pretty much an open event for adults and kids. What's going to be at Crowder County Park in Apex, and that will be on August 23rd, obviously in the evening. And all the details of this stuff are on our website, by the way. So if you want to just check it out there, look at the posts and just click to register. We're also going to have our next in-person meeting, which we do quarterly at Bass Lake Park, which is kind of our center of operations. And we're excited to have Luke Bennett, who was our conservation coordinator, and now he's out in the mountains on the western part of North Carolina. And he's going to talk about adventures on the Pacific Crest Trail, where he hiked all the way from Canada to Mexico this past fall. So we're excited to have him here come in person. That's on September 4th. And then we have an animal signs hike, which is basically taking the kids along a path in a natural environment and looking for any kind of signs of animals. It might be animal tracks, it might be things underneath a log, it might be any number of things. That's pretty fun too. It's kind of a discovery type of activity, and that's on September 13th. So that's a lot. Everybody doesn't come to everything, but you'll see the website there on the bottom of the screen. Please check out the website, subscribe if you haven't, and then join whichever ones you can do. So I'd like to now introduce our speaker. And our speaker is a landscape architect with a degree from the University of Virginia. She has over 15 years of experience designing and delivering innovative and environmentally focused landscapes in North Carolina and the Mid-Atlantic region. She's very passionate about environmental stewardship and the role of landscape architecture in connecting people with nature. She specializes in native planting design, ecological systems, green stormwater infrastructure, and placemaking that supports both people and wildlife. Her designs foster resilience, encourage biodiversity, and create lasting, meaningful experiences for all who interact with the space, human and non-human alike. We were delighted to meet her last year when she's been coming to some of our events, and we talked about the things we do, and she's now joined our chapter and now is on our board of directors as an at-large member. So we're happy to have her on the team. She'll be speaking us tonight about how thoughtful plant selection and spatial organization can provide critical resources for pollinators, birds, and other wildlife, all the while enhancing the visual appeal and the usability of a space. So that's a nice combination, and I know people are excited to learn more about that. So please welcome Sarah Donahoe.
Thank you, Monty. Appreciate it. I'm excited to talk with everybody today. So I will steal the screen from you, and we can get going. Let's see. All right. Get in presentation mode. Can y'all see this all right? Cool. Thank you all again for joining tonight. This is a topic I'm particularly passionate about. This is something that one of the things that actually drove me into the field of landscape architecture. So I'm really excited to share some little nuggets of knowledge with y'all today. So a little bit about me. I am a practice lead of our landscape architecture group here at McAdams within our planning and design group. And McAdams is a full-service design, engineering, planning, and landscape architecture firm. We provide basically full-service design, nuts and bolts and everything. And we are have a total of 500 professionals and we span the East Coast down to Florida and even over into Texas. And I see a few of my coworkers here. So welcome to all of my McAdams friends here. Me personally, I have over 15 years of experience, and I've worked in places like Washington, D.C., and Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, mostly focusing on the Mid-Atlantic for the most part. But as I mentioned, my passion really comes from native planting design and doing designs that promote ecological and environmental stewardship and resiliency for long-term impact. And we really love to make spaces that are beautiful and functional for both people and wildlife. And that's probably one of the core values that we do have here at McAdams. So here's our little agenda for tonight. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about, some key design considerations that you think about, or that we as designers often think about before you even put pen to paper, some strategies to achieve your designs. I'm going to talk a little bit about some strategies specifically targeting wildlife, and I'm going to end on a little bit of insight on how I personally do planting design, which seems to resonate with others that I have shown it to. So going to give you a little bit of insight on how I do things day to day. So I will say today we're going to focus on the design portion of planting. I'm not going to go so much into specific planting species or companion groups, only because as you'll learn through the presentation, specific species and specific plants, they're going to be really tailored to your site and to your project based on your goals. And so what may work here in the Piedmont area of North Carolina may not work for you out in the mountains. It may not work for you out on the coast. So not going to totally talk a lot about specific plants per se, and I'm by no means a horticultural expert. I know enough to be dangerous, but I will say that I will try my best to answer any kind of questions that y'all have on that topic. Also not going to touch too much on the construction side of things or the installation side of planting design. That could be a whole topic in and of itself. There's a lot of things that go into installation and long-term maintenance. It is a consideration when you're going through design, which is what I'll touch on today, but we're really going to focus on the actual design component of planting. All right, so what we're going to start with is the power of planting design. And we all know that a beautiful plant design in a beautiful landscape can be jaw-dropping, heart-stopping, and just a place of rest and respite, not only for people, but also wildlife. So really those first impressions, they do matter. The design decisions that you make initially, they do have an impact long-term. Your material that you select matters, whether it's native or non-native, how those plants act over time and how they grow over time or naturalize over time, what your style is and what kind of maintenance you're planning to have. And all design is really about striking the balance between all of these needs and really setting the tone for your project. And so making sure that you're setting these goals and understanding these goals early on in the process is really going to help you make the best design decisions for your site. So we've all been at a space where maybe the planting design is a little on the lacking side. I call these missed opportunities. These can be in areas wherever you go. It could be your local community, your local park, your dog park, your apartment complex. A lot of times where we have missed opportunities, layers are missing, where you have, missing ground cover, missing trees. You don't have the best relationship to your surroundings, where maybe you have a really, really dark building, and your plants right next to it are also very dark. So you don't really have a lot of color contrast. Sometimes you're not so much paying attention to the mature growth of plants, and maybe something on the smaller side is tucked into the back and you actually can't see it. I see numerous occasions there's a lack of seasonal interest, species diversity, and importantly, evergreen plant material, which plays into that seasonal interest year-round. So we see this all the time, and how can we fix it for both people and wildlife? Really what we as landscape architects, we drive for design excellence. And some of the things I have on the screen here are some design goals that we strive for in all of our projects. Having or meeting one or more of these goals only provides more opportunities for your project and helps guide all of your design decisions. So whether you have a clear design style that you're trying to hit, if you're really focused on that human experience of a space, You always want to make sure that you have, vertical and horizontal hierarchy of plants, planting space, but also hardscape space. And of course, the whole goal of this is to integrate with your surroundings and have a really phenomenal wildlife experience that balances that human experience that you do have. So how do we achieve these goals? We do have some strategies. I've got a few up on the screen here. This isn't a limited list of what kind of strategies we use, but we use things like repetition and rhythm and massing of plants to try and create that visual unity for us as humans to experience. But we're not the only ones experiencing a space. We're also allowing wildlife to experience a space. So is this the right plant for the right place? Is it serving the wildlife of your ecological region? And also, is this landscape going to be sustainable and resilient over time? These are some strategies that we like to think about over time and just ways that we can create some intentionality as we're going through this design phase. So that's a lot of good strategies and goals, and it's kind of like, okay, well, yeah, it's a lot of that's nice and fluffy material, but how do you actually get there? And that's where we're going to go into next. So what we're going to talk about is some key pre-design considerations. And really, this is honestly before you even put pen to paper, before you're thinking about plant species, before you're doing anything. What you're going to do is you need to understand how your site is functioning, what your human goals are, what your wildlife goals are, and also your constraints like budget and maintenance. So I'm a big checklist fan. I love my checklists. So I've got a few items here on the screen, and I'll go through a couple of these. And if anybody honestly wants this presentation to have these checklists that I have throughout, happy to share this with everybody. These are just a couple of things to think about when you're looking at a site or looking at a project and starting to think about how am I going to achieve my goals for people and for wildlife. So some human goals you might have. How are people using the site? An urban condition is going to be used by people much differently than a park or even your, community playground, quite frankly. What parts of your project are important to people and how are they going to use them? If you have a client, like if you're doing a residential backyard or you're doing your own backyard, do you or does your client like a certain style? Do they like a certain plant? What are the must-haves that you have to include in your design? These are really critical things because they do set some constraints on your design and they help guide your decisions. Next important thing is really understanding your site. What is your site doing? What's the topography doing? What's your sunshade conditions? Do you have a big building on your site? Is there something there that you want to celebrate? Do you have a beautiful oak tree that you want to be a focal piece of your space? The site constraints are really, really critical to understand ahead of time because they absolutely drive your plant selections because we, of course, want to have the right plant in the right space. So budget and maintenance are next. Constraints that not everybody always wants to talk about, but planting design does come with a budget and it does come with a cost. Some people are able to afford more than others, and some projects are phased over time. And understanding what level of financial input is being provided is really critical on how much you are designing in specific phases and what size of plants are even going in. And then maintenance on the back side of things. Who's going to be doing the maintenance? Is your client going to let it go natural and not do any maintenance at all? Or are they going to be out every 2 weeks deadheading perennials and pulling weeds? It's a very different intention on your design strategy based on maintenance. Some other big ones that a lot of people, especially for native planting design, don't necessarily want to talk about, but is there going to be irrigation? If you all have experienced a North Carolina summer, you know that even the toughest drought-tolerant plant will struggle if it is in a spot that gets beat down by sun all day long. So sometimes irrigation is incredibly important to have, especially that initial establishment. And really, if you've got a client that is using a landscape company who's going to be maintaining your space, a lot of landscape maintenance companies, they focus on lawn spaces for the majority of the time, and they use a lot of chemicals, and sometimes we don't have as much control over what is being applied to the site. So understanding, who's going to be maintaining it and what kind of maintenance will be there is really critical for the success of your project. And then the fun part for our conversation today is, what are your wildlife goals? We know that wildlife uses spaces year-round, and they need spaces for food, shelter, and places to raise their young. So how do we select species and arrange our species so that we can promote pollinators, promote our specialist species, but also give them places where they have less threats from human activity or other wildlife activity? So we've thought about our goals. We know kind of what we want to do. We know who we want to impact and how we're going to impact it. Next is talking about your style and what you want your space to look like. Landscape architecture comes in many, many different forms. It can range from completely naturalized Piedmont prairies to a very, very manicured formal lawn. And really, your style is just how you want things to look and how you want things to function. There is no one right style or wrong style. I think some styles of planting design do promote wildlife better than others. But just because you are working with a style that perhaps may have less opportunities for wildlife, that does not mean that you cannot still impact and provide support for wildlife. So I'm going to go through a few pretty standard styles of planting design and what their typical characteristics are. I'll be completely honest, I think a lot of landscape architects probably merge a lot of different styles in some way, shape, or form. And you can do that. I think you just have to be very intentional about how you're merging styles so that you can still have your design be legible and aesthetic at the same time. All right, so a couple of design styles that we have here. Cottage is probably what most people think of as backyard landscape design, where it's pretty informal, pretty whimsical, kind of messy and informal. The style has a great opportunities for wildlife, mostly because it's very dense and layered. And we'll talk about that design component a little bit later in the presentation. But it provides a lot. This style provides a lot of variety and shelter opportunities for wildlife. It is a high maintenance style, though, so that is definitely something to consider. Next one would be your traditional English formal garden. Sometimes you see this in a lot of botanical gardens. They're considered, symmetrical, a lot of geometric shapes. There's a real big focus on vast lawn spaces, and this comes from kind of European idealism on what a landscape should look like. The wildlife impact can be a little bit lower in this style just because there is such a focus on vast lawn spaces and there's kind of a limited naturalization of plantings. But that does not mean that you still cannot have wildlife impact based on what kind of planting species you choose. The modern style is probably what you see in a lot of urban conditions. Really clean, straight lines, big masses of plants, really bold forms of repetition. Again, not usually as impactful for wildlife, but if you start using big masses of native plantings, you can certainly have a lot more impact. These next few, Japanese garden, really Japanese gardens are really beautiful in that they use a lot of greens and mosses and natural textures, and really the design is guided by the natural forms of the landscape versus forcing a geometric form on the space. And the wildlife value here, depending on where your garden is located, can actually be pretty good for wildlife. Japanese gardens often create kind of nice, leafy, dense plantings that certainly provide a lot of opportunity for smaller habitats for wildlife. A container garden. Not everybody has acres of land that they can design. Sometimes you just have some planter pots on your apartment balcony, and you can still have a lot of impact with that. So typically, what you can do for container gardens is use the strategy of the layers of filler, spiller, and thriller, which I could go into a little bit if anybody wants to talk a little bit more about that. But really, it's about creating those layers in a very, very small space. But typically, container gardens are usually on a rooftop or in a space where you do have a microclimate. So that does impact the wildlife that comes to that space. And a lot of times your wildlife might be limited to pollinators. Typically, you're putting flowering plants into containers. And then on the complete flip side, the whole rewilding naturalization approach, and this is really untamed, ecologically rich. This is what, if you're planting along a stream, doing a stream restoration, or planting along a stormwater pond, or doing a Piedmont prairie in your yard, this is kind of the look that you're going for. And the wildlife impact is, of course, very high because it is replicating what a natural condition would be. All right, so we have our goals and we kind of know what style we want to do. So now we really want to think about how we can impact wildlife through our design choices. First off, I want to talk about the most important thing for wildlife, and that is the role of native plants. Native plants and their use in the landscape are critical for functional wildlife habitat. Wildlife has evolved with native plants over many, 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 many years, and that native plants inherently support all forms of wildlife, from insects to pollinators, birds, mammals, you name it. Native plants typically require a little less maintenance. They usually take a little less water and they have better resilience for your ecological region. And quite frankly, they provide year-round resources for wildlife. Typically, these plants, they are not only providing nectar in the spring, but they're also providing fruit in the summer, seeds in the fall, and then cover during the winter. So if anybody's familiar with Doug Tallamy, if you haven't read any of his books, I would highly recommend it. I love hearing him talk. His research suggests that if we provide at least 70% native plants in our designs, we can support nature way more efficiently than if you use less than that. My personal design goal for all of my projects is to hit 80% native plants if absolutely possible. Sometimes we can't always do that, but that is typically our goal that we want to hit. So let's talk a little bit about what a native plant actually is. There are a lot of definitions on what a native plant is, and I will try to consolidate it for you. I think there's a lot of opinions on what truly, what a true native plant actually is. But what I'm going to kind of talk about is that a native plant is really a species that occurs naturally in a very specific region, ecosystem, or habitat without humans, interfering with that plant. And typically that plant species has evolved in that region over thousands of years, and it has a very intimate and connected relationship with its local climate and local wildlife. And it directly benefits the local ecology and the local environment. So really, if you think about it, if a plant was in an area or an ecoregion or an ecosystem before European colonization, it's probably likely going to be considered a native plant. But just remember, when you're designing, just because a plant is native to North America, it does not mean that it's native to your region. So we may have a native grass that is technically native to Texas or Colorado that can perform in the North Carolina area and can probably perform pretty well. but it's actually not native to our area, so it may not be serving wildlife as successfully here as it would be in its natural range. So whenever you see those native maps that the USDA puts out, just keep in mind of where something is naturally occurring versus where it has been introduced or it's adapted to. On the flip side, we have nativars, or a native cultivar, and basically that is a cultivated variety of a native plant. And basically those plants are bred for specific traits, whether that's color, size of blooms, disease resistance. And while they're derived from the wild version of that species, they're all genetically identical. So they may slightly differ in their form or their ecological function from their wild counterpart. So in general, a nativar still has a similar ecological quality to a true straight species, but it may have a little bit more aesthetic predictability. And typically these are the plants that you're going to find in the typical nursery trade. And they're usually available pretty, a little bit more than the straight wild species. So I will say, while they're not totally equivalent because they don't have the genetic diversity that a straight species would have, they still do provide food and habitat for pollinators and wildlife, and they're going to still perform that ecological role. Now we'll talk a little bit about an exotic plant or a non-native plant, and that's basically a plant species that has been introduced to our region and our ecosystem, either intentionally or unintentionally, and it's done through humans. An exotic plant or non-native plant only becomes invasive when it spreads aggressively and when it starts to impact the ecological resiliency of an area, and it causes ecological harm, economic harm, or human harm in some unfortunate areas. So a lot of times these exotic plants, they're introduced for, a lot of times their aesthetic qualities, or they're really great at adapting to challenging conditions, pests, disease resistance. But they also do provide some horticultural variety, and they still can support pollinators. But just got to remember that all invasive plants are exotic, but not all exotic plants are invasive. And some exotic or non-native plants, they can be used safely in design if they are monitored for their behavior over time. So I've got some pictures up here. Itea is one of my favorite plants. I love a good Itea. And I was so excited to find a wild variety at the pond that I go walk by all the time. So I took a picture and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I found this wild Itea. This is so exciting. So the picture on the far left is a wild occurring Itea. The picture in the middle is a nativar of Itea. It's called Little Henry. One of my favorite plants that I use in designs all the time. It's nice and compact. It still suckers like the wild species does, but it blooms profusely and it's pretty widely available. And then on the far right, Distilium, one of my favorite plants. It's a non-native plant, but it is a bulletproof evergreen, and I will use it all the time. It is not invasive. It doesn't spread. It really just does its job of being kind of a boxwood alternative. So one of my favorites. So all that to say, native plants are critical. You must have native plants in order to support wildlife. But that does not necessarily mean in your planting designs that you have to use native plants exclusively, because sometimes native plants don't always fulfill the goals of the project or the site. All right, so now that we've talked about native plants, how do you even design for wildlife? I've broken this into 4 design strategies that we can explore a little bit. First, we'll talk about layered plantings, seasonal diversity, and then we'll go into massing and edges. So strategy number 1, layered plantings. This is probably the most critical design strategy that if you do one, do this one. Layered plantings means that you're filling each horizontal layer of your planting design. So that's the ground cover, the shrub layer, and the tree level. You want all of these levels to be covered with plant material as much as possible. Ultimately, your trees and your shrubs are going to become your framework of the design. And typically your middle level is going to be your seasonal and your flowering plants. And then your ground covers are going to reduce all of your weeds, and they're also going to provide soil stability, particularly for our erosion control concerns that we often have on a lot of our sites. So how does this support wildlife? Well, really it mimics what natural ecological systems are. They very rarely do you only have trees in an ecology. Typically you do have lots of different layers. And wildlife has evolved to use all of these different vertical zones for different needs, whether that's food, shelter, or nesting. Having all these layers also increases microhabitats. So if anybody's ever walked from a meadow into a forest, you can completely tell the temperature difference, and you can tell that it's a completely different environment. Wildlife needs those differing conditions to help them survive. So these different layers create different areas of temperature, different areas of light and moisture. And it basically just provides a wider range of conditions for them to thrive. It also provides year-round support where you have leaf litter coming down from the trees and supporting the overwintering needs of mostly insects, but also mammals as well. All these different layers, it just supports more species. We know that there are birds that live the majority of their lifespan in the canopies of trees, but we also know that there are ground nesting birds that live the majority of their lifespan on the ground. And they often move between all of these different layers to meet all of their needs. So when you eliminate one of those layers, you're essentially making it more challenging for the animal to survive in a natural condition. Pollinators also really love to forage on that middle herbaceous level. And mammals, they also use all the different layers. Quite frankly, a lot of them live in the trees, but come down to the ground for food, foraging, and also to move between spaces. So what does this look like in design? I love this diagram from Thomas Rainier. His book, Planting in a Post-Wild World, is one of my absolute favorites. I highly recommend you check it out. But this is a really great diagram that shows those differing layers. And he even goes so much to talk about how much of that layer should compose of your overall planting design. I don't know that I necessarily follow those percentages to a T, but I do think that it's a really great go by if you're interested in kind of the mathematical diversity of these differing layers. And then over on the right, I have a little bit of an example of some example plants of what layer and kind of a wildlife benefit that comes from that. So, for example, your canopy layer and your understory tree layer, which would relate to Thomas Rainier's structural layer, those might be your oaks, your redbuds, your dogwoods, and those provide nectar, fruit, and even bird perches. Alternatively, your ground cover layer could be sedges, ferns, leaf litter, and this is where you have a moist condition for shelter, primarily helping insects and amphibian habitats. So strategy number 2, seasonal diversity. We all strive to have something in bloom all year round. It's beautiful for people, but also fantastic for wildlife. Wildlife needs year-round support for food. Different species are active at different times of the year. You need early blooming species like red maples to kind of support those pollinators that are waking up. But you also need some midsummer and fall season pollinators or pollinating plants like goldenrod, which really support insects and pollinators that are either migrating or they are starting to prepare to go into their overwintering condition. Seasonal diversity, it also supports your full life cycle. A lot of wildlife is moving from hatching and living and then laying eggs and dying. And they usually do this all within the span of 1 year. And so having a seasonal variety of plants helps support that full life cycle. And then, of course, it supports diversity. Having plants that are blooming or providing support all year round is only going to support a wider range of wildlife species. And of course, this is particularly important for the use of host plants and being able to support those specialist pollinators and insects. So what does this look like in the design form? Again, another lovely diagram from Planting in a Post-Wild World. Thomas Rainier focuses on pollinator plants as kind of that seasonal theme layer, but in my personal opinion, I think that that seasonal layer expands beyond perennials for them and expands into shrubs and trees as well. So some examples of some plants that are providing wildlife support during each season. I mentioned for the spring, red maples coming in, and they are one of the first to actually start blooming, and they provide nectar for those early emerging pollinators. Summer, that's when your milkweed and your black-eyed Susans, they're in full bloom, and they provide the nectar and the fruit. In the fall, goldenrod and aster, they are really critical for those late season nectar and also the seeds for going into winter. And I would highly, highly encourage everybody leave all of their plants up during the winter and don't cut things back because they do provide critical shelter and seed for those overwintering months. Strategy number 3, this is really geared towards more of a design and an aesthetic thing, but it is ecologically important to mass native plantings and compatible native plants that traditionally grow together. And really, when you do these large masses of plants versus onesie twosies of one plant here and there, really that creates a signal for wildlife to say, hey, come here, I've got a lot of plants for you that are going to support you. So when you have these big masses, it really sends this large signal out. And quite frankly, this massing replicates a native plant community. If you've ever gone and walked through the woods, you might see a giant massive lizard's tail in kind of a vernal pool. And really just this whole mass just because it just goes crazy. And so replicating that massing helps send out those signals, and it creates an efficient habitat. So really that allows for for microhabitats where wildlife can really find all of the things that they need all in one space. So they're spending less energy flying here and going there, searching for food and shelter, when really you can concentrate things into one space. And that allows them to be more successful, requires less movement, less energy use, and a larger variety of wildlife is able to find those big massings of plants that are grouped together. So for example, we all love our milkweed. We love our monarch butterfly. The likelihood of a monarch butterfly finding one milkweed plant in your yard is going to be a little bit less unless you have, a big mass of it where it's a big signal of I've got a lot of milkweed for all of you monarch butterflies to come to my site. So here's an example of this, massing successfully on the right, and on the left image is not a poor design by any means, but you can kind of see that these planting groups are scattered around, they're spaced far apart, and even separated from hardscape in this image. So less likely for wildlife, insects, and mammals to be able to move between those spaces than on the picture on the right, where they have shelter, nectar, and seed all in one area. Last strategy, edges. An edge condition between two habitats is called an ecotone. And these zones are probably the most biologically diverse part of the landscape. And that is really because you have two habitats and they're commingling and they're merging together. And so you're having wildlife that live in both habitats merging in this space. So these are really critical areas and really critical, especially for if you're working through a naturalized design to really pay attention to these edge conditions. So these edge conditions typically have sun shade differences, and there's a variety of shade gradients, and that provides either longer bloom time or more shade time so that plants are, so that animals can move from one space to another pretty safely and easily. You usually have a lot more diversity in plant species in these conditions, especially naturally, what's naturally occurring. And a lot of wildlife species actually prefer to be in these zones because they can use both the qualities of both zones. For example, an insect, they might lay their eggs in the sunny spot of a plant, but they, retreat back into the shade of the forest to rest and to recover from being out in the sun. A lot of wildlife species also use these zones to move, and they are spaces where they can have quite a lot of protection from predators, both other wildlife and people. So they are often really critical places where you see a lot of tracks, a lot of movement. So what does this look like in the design field? Again, this is probably a little bit more geared towards a naturalistic design approach, but really this image on the screen is from Larry Weiner. Again, he has some phenomenal seminars if you're ever interested, and he talks a lot about this transition of ecotones from grasslands to shrublands to the woodland edge and how important these specific areas are to specific wildlife species. If all else fails and you have nowhere to start, again, I love a good checklist. National Wildlife Federation, they have their Garden for Wildlife checklist where you can look through each of these items and make sure that you can check off that you're providing food, water, cover, places to raise their young, and also some sustainable practices. And if you can check as many of these boxes as possible, then you know that you're supporting wildlife in your area. Okay, so getting towards the end, stay with me. So we've talked about our project goals, our site goals, our personal goals, what our style might be, what it might look like, and then of course, learned about how we can support wildlife through our design choices. So now, how do you even do that? I use a technique that I've coined as color blocking. It's my own personal technique for sketching, and this is how I break all of these things down in my brain into a series of sequential diagrams that helps me personally inform decisions when I'm doing design. So really, this is a way that I can slow down. I can really take and observe the goals of the site, the needs of the site, and the needs of the project. And I can really start to understand what is a critical path item, and I can make informed decisions. So really, this is a strategy that I use personally to kind of take all of the noise, try and make some sense out of it all, and then hopefully come out at the end of the day with a successful planting design. This has been really inspired by a variety of landscape architects. I mentioned Thomas Rainier and Larry Weiner. I've read a lot of their books and done a lot of their seminars, but also I love the planting designs by Pete Oldoff. Those are beautiful and inspiring in and of themselves. So these different styles by very famous and accomplished landscape architects have kind of informed how I do this approach. And I'll be completely honest, this is not the only way to do planting design. It's really the method that works for me. And I've shared this approach with other people, and it seems to resonate with others, and it seems to allow people to understand the planting design process. So all that to say, the best approach is the one that works for you personally and your project. And this is just how I how I work and how I try to make sense of all of this. So do what works best for you, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of insight on how I actually do things. All right. Again, we got some phases and some steps we got to go through. So first, we start with some site analysis. Again, we're taking those goals and we're kind of making some design constraints for ourselves. And then we go through the traditional schematic design, design development, and construction documentation phases. And if you're a designer or familiar with design engineering, you're probably likely familiar with these phases of a project. So first phase is site analysis. We've got all of our goals. We've thought about all of that. We know what we want things to look like, but really we need to analyze the site. We need to know where the sunshade is. We need to know what the topography is doing. We need to know where our wet sites are or our dry spots are. Is there a swale where it has some rainfall, water coming down it during a giant rainstorm, but it's dry during the rest of the season? Where do you have wind coming in? Do you already have ecological movement or wildlife movement on your site? A lot of times you already do, and you just need to look for signs for that. Do you have some human programs that you need to think about? Do you have beautiful view sheds? Sometimes you have a really big high point on your site and you can see for a long time or for a long span, and you want to expand and celebrate those views. You got a big tree on your site. You want to know where that is and you want to celebrate it and be able to design around it. Being able to analyze what you have on the site not only presents opportunities, but it also provides some constraints for you. And sometimes having those opportunities and constraints helps you make design decisions in the future. So when we go through all this, I'm going to look at a project here on the right side of the screen that I'm actively working on, not installed yet, but hopefully gets installed how I've visioned, and it's not value engineered out. But this is a stormwater park that I'm actively working on right now. The picture on the right is the conceptual rendering of that park. The blue is the wet pond that is functioning as a stormwater device for the development. And around it, we have a walking trail and some dedicated plaza spaces that are up in a more urban condition that are overlooking this actual pond. So the picture on the right was the initial concept vision that we presented to our client. And the process that I'm going to show you is how we've gone through the actual planting design of this space. So going into site analysis, what does this actually look like? This is actually usually a lot of layers. If you've met a designer, you know that they use trace paper, which is kind of that translucent paper. They put lots of layers and they scribble all over it, but really this is just us understanding the site. Here's where I really like to write out all of my goals. What I want my client goals are, what are my personal goals, what are the wildlife goals. Here I'm diagramming view sheds, where pedestrian activity is, where are points of interest where I want people to stop and interact with wildlife, or where do I want people to actually just step back and look and watch wildlife without actually interacting. So this is kind of what a diagram might look like. It could be very simple, or it could be very complex, or it could have a lot of different layers. Next phase is our schematic design phase. This is where we take that site analysis and we're providing broad strokes of masses to help us organize the space. And we're organizing the space with intention and theory, not thinking about plant lists yet. If you're thinking about plants yet already, you're 10 steps ahead of yourself. This is how you can organize your site and think about things in big masses, big movements, and this helps provide intentionality to the site. So here's where you're thinking about primary zones. Where do you want your lawn? Where do you want shrub masses? Where do you want your new trees? And how do all these zones relate to one another? Where are people walking through? Where do you want them to interact with wildlife or a naturalistic setting? Or where do you want them to stay a little bit away and give wildlife their privacy? Also, looking at places of conflict. Do you have utilities? Do you have overhead power lines? Do you have underground utilities that you need to stay away from? Or in the case of the project that we're looking at, we have a stormwater pond. There are a lot of restrictions for design and planting around a stormwater pond. So this is where we use where I personally use color to kind of look at the forms of the overall space. So here's what that might look like. Usually I start with something on the right where I am starting to highlight big spaces, where I want my turf, where I want my trees, where I want my big shrub masses and my perennials and my ornamental grasses. In this case, because it is a stormwater pond, I do have specific pond plantings that go around the water's edge of the pond, and that is a specific zone in and of itself. A lot of times this is, you know, a lot of layers, and it can be a lot of layers on top of one another. And the image on the right is kind of a second version on top of that, where I started to go through and identify within these overall masses what type of plant it might be. So for example, in the dark green in the diagram on the right, I've defined that as an evergreen or a deciduous shrub mass. The image on the left, I'm kind of diving in a little bit more, looking about what kind of texture or type of shrub, or whether I do want it to be an evergreen shrub that is nice and tight and tidy, or if I want something that's a little bit sprawling and has a little bit more texture. Next phase is design development. And this is where you start getting into your planting palette. So now we've had our diagrams and we kind of know what type of plants we want. We know that we want a nice and tight evergreen here. We want a sprawling coniferous evergreen here. We want our flowering deciduous shrub over there. And we want our perennials in front. And we want this big mass of ornamental grasses over there. So now that we have kind of our categories, then you can dive into your plant palette and start thinking, okay, this plant, and this plant is going to fill that niche. And you start developing your plant palette. Where you want to start diving in here is making sure that you're establishing that rhythm. Where does repetition and massing and contrast occur? Looking at actual pictures of plants, putting them next to one another, seeing what they look like one another. Looking at bloom charts and making sure that you've got seasonality across all of your plant types. So this is where you're really diving in and picking those species. This is probably the most challenging part that people struggle with, but the intention of the diagrams that you've done in your first two phases and combined with all of your goals and your planting strategies hopefully narrows down your options for what kind of plant you're looking for. So for example, if you're looking for a flowering shrub, you kind of know, okay, I kind of need it to be this size. I want it to be this color flower, and I want it to have this kind of smell. And that may help you do a little bit of research to be able to find the plant that fits that purpose. So here's kind of what that looks like. Here's where you are actually pulling your plants together. I love using a program where I can cut and paste pictures. I'm a super visual person, so I really need pictures, and putting them all together and seeing what things look like when they're going to be right next to one another. So that's a really critical component for me. But also, as part of the color blocking technique, I try to match the color to the bloom color of the plant so that I can see how all those colors are going to kind of merge and work together. This is where I'm actually highlighting species on the plan. I'm kind of trying to figure out where those shrubs might go, how they might interact, and how they might tie into the adjacent plantings. All right, last phase, construction documentation. This is where I ask my staff to put it into CAD. No, I'm just kidding. I've done many CAD, many hours in CAD myself. But this is where we take the planting design and we actually digitize it so that it can be passed off to an installer so that they can legibly read the plan and understand where these plants go. So this is still, you can still be in the design phase even when you're here. You're checking your grading and you're locating all of your plants along your contour lines. You are looking for utility and easement conflicts. You're making sure that root zones for existing trees aren't being disturbed. And so you're still kind of designing on the fly a little bit when you're getting things digitized and into the computer. This is also where you put together your final plant schedule, and that's where you're identifying how big a plant wants to be when it goes in, what's your on-center spacing going to be. This is also the time where you can dictate when things are installed so that you can have the best success for your design. And that's what this looks like, a black and white drawing. We sometimes do these in color for legibility. But this is what we would give a contractor, and this is what they use to go out and install. And this is when I love to go back to our handy dandy checklists. You can either use the National Wildlife Federation's checklist. There are also other checklists that you can use. I know Town of Apex locally here in the Triad area or Triangle area of North Carolina, they have a phenomenal pollinator garden checklist that I reference frequently. But this is also a great time to kind of take back a couple steps and make sure that you're meeting the intention, which is supporting wildlife. All right, last little bit here. We're coming down to the edge. I won't run through all of these, but there are a couple of professional points that I love to point out to other people. I've kind of learned throughout the years that sometimes human and wildlife or naturalized spaces don't often mix. The average public, they kind of want to look at wildlife, but they don't want to interact with it all the time. So really thinking about who your end user is and how you want people and wildlife to interact is really, really important. Sometimes even just a turf edge or a lawn edge of 4 or 5 feet wide that helps define your natural area dedicated to wildlife helps people feel a little bit more comfortable. They can have the bees and the wasps and the hornets and the birds over there, but they don't necessarily have to interact or touch those plants. And sometimes that can be really critical for the average public. Rhythm, repetition, and massing are critical for aesthetic legibility. And quite frankly, I found throughout the years that we never plant enough trees. Trees are like a keystone species, especially like oaks. So if you're going to throw something in your plan, put a tree in there because they are just phenomenal on all levels. But you know, there are a lot of different things that I could certainly help. I could talk about all day, quite frankly. And if you're interested in looking a little bit deeper into this list, I'm happy to share that with you. Another fun fact, I have it up here on the top of the screen. But when you're buying a tree, the caliper size, which is the DBH or the diameter at breast height size, that says how old the tree actually is. Generally, according to my arborist friends, equates to how many years it needs to take to become established. So if you go and you install a 2-inch caliper tree, it usually takes about 2 years for that tree to be fully established and to start growing. So you're not going to see a lot of growth in those first 2 years, but after those 2 years, you're going to see an exponential growth because it's already rooted in its base. Conversely, if you specify a 5-inch caliber tree, it's going to take 5 years for that tree to get established. So a lot of times I'll do a design and a client will want a really, really big tree installed for that day one impact, which of course is so important. But usually that smaller tree that we also planted and at a much cheaper price usually catches up to those big trees in just a couple years. So fun fact from me. All right. Like I said, I am no horticultural expert by any means. I know enough about plants to be a little dangerous, but I heavily rely on others and my plant list that I find online. So here are a few that I have on this list here that I use frequently. I have them bookmarked and I look at them all the time. I will say for our friends that are in other states, this is definitely geared towards North Carolina. I think a lot of these plants would translate to other states, especially our neighboring states of Virginia and South Carolina. But as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, just because a native plant is native to North America does not necessarily mean it is native to your ecoregion. So if native planting is a special consideration for you, just make sure that the plants you're specifying are native to your region. And then if you want to dive in a little bit more, I mentioned a couple of books by Doug Tallamy and Larry Weiner that I really, really love. Books by Thomas Rainier have been really influential for me as well. But Larry Weiner, he also leads a group called the New Directions in the American Landscape. And he provides virtual seminars every year, and they are phenomenal. So if you're able, I would highly, highly recommend joining those. You will absolutely learn quite a bit from him. All right, that's where I am. I'm at. I am happy to answer any kind of questions, and boy, we've got a lot. I have not had a chance to keep up with the actual chat. So Kara, maybe you can help me out a little bit.
Yes. Well, and thank you so much, Sarah. That was a wonderful presentation. Again, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I'll start from the top with the question that was answered earliest in the presentation. So I think first question, is there a particular or affordable design software that you would recommend for drawing up plans?
Oh, that's a good question. I have been fortunate enough to be in the corporate world for my entire career, and I have always used AutoCAD and have been fortunate enough to use the plugin LandFX that works with the AutoCAD programs. I know there are a lot out there. I am not going to pretend that I'm familiar with a lot of them. The sketching program that I use is called Morpholio Trace. It's offered on, and I use the iPad for that. It's only like, I don't know, $20 a year. I mean, it's super cheap and a phenomenal digital sketching platform that I use. And it's really great for that really fast diagramming and those color blocking exercises that I shared. So if you're interested in the digital platform, that would be one that I would recommend exploring.
Somebody asked if the recording will be available, and I can answer that question. Yes, it will be available. We'll send it out as soon as ready, but it will also be posted on the NCWF YouTube page. Okay, there was some discussion about milkweed, but I'm not finding that question. Oh, how do you clear grass and the seed bank before starting your native plantings? A little bit about the site prep.
Right. That topic leans a little bit more into the installation side of things, which I'm happy to explore a little bit more with y'all. So that can usually be a process, and unfortunately, you do need to use some chemicals to eliminate some invasive seed banks, and that can be really challenging. I know that there are definitely a lot more experts on that than me, per se. One of my favorite friends here in the Raleigh-Durham area is Leaf and Limb, and they are experts in Piedmont prairies. And Basil over there has a lot of expertise when it comes to essentially clearing the site and prepping it for installation. I will say in my experience, I work in the development side of things. I'll be honest, a lot of things are already clear cut and that seed bank is already long gone by the time I get to it. So it's not something that typically is an upfront challenge for us.
That makes total sense. North Carolina Extension offices also have some really great resources about site prep. It depends on the time frame that you're looking at for planting. If you've got a little while before you want to plant, the recommendation I usually hear is putting down cardboard and then mulching over top of it with at least 6 inches of mulch. If you don't want to use an herbicide, there are lots of great resources. I can send out a couple of links in the follow-up email as well so that you can check out some of those resources. There's lots of different options with depending on how dirty you want to get. Um, Lots of great feedback, great presentation. Somebody said that Chat GPT could be used for basic garden design. So that's something to check out if
Yeah.
you're interested. Yeah, there was some discussion about uh, milkweed and common milkweed beetles, but I think that was pretty much answered by other people in the chat. So thank you all for your collaboration. Yeah, that's all the questions I'm seeing from the chat. Are there any other questions? Type it in the chat, or you can raise your hand. I think it looks like Jennifer, you're trying to speak. You're on mute right now.
I was getting ready to type in my question. What can I do about these milkweed beetles? They decimated my Arizona milkweed, and if I get a different milkweed to replace it, I want to know what I can do to protect that. I mean, I've been squashing them, but there's so many of them. I
I
can't spray them.
I will say I have also had milkweed in my personal yard be demolished by milkweed beetles. I don't know that I necessarily have a recommendation for controlling those. Again, usually what I will just do is keep replacing it. My own personal strategy in my own garden is that if it doesn't thrive on neglect, then I don't plant it. And I love there are some species that I absolutely love and I absolutely adore and I want them on my property so bad, but they either get demolished by a fungus, a beetle, a disease, deer, or I love my deer, but they eat freaking everything. And
Mhm.
so again, that goes back to your own personal design goals. What is really
Okay.
truly important to you, and then tying that to your site. So perhaps you can explore having another variety, like you mentioned, that still supports pollinators, and particularly the monarch butterfly, but may not be as susceptible. So yeah, I wish I could give you more help.
Yeah, because I probably had 3, 4 dozen Arizona milkweed plants in one area.
Yeah.
And I had been told by the person who told me about it originally, he said, "Oh, don't worry, the milkweed bugs, they don't hurt anything." Well, that's if you only have one or two.
Yeah.
So yeah, I've been going around, realized they were stripping the plants, and I started killing them one by one. And
hmm Yeah, that's why I feel you to my core on that, which is why the plants that I put in my own personal yard, and quite frankly, a lot of the plant species that I use in my designs, they thrive on neglect. You leave them and you let them do their thing.
Mhm.
And if if it doesn't make it, then it may not be the right plant for that spot.
Right, well, yeah, because they were thriving, they were spreading, but
Well, hopefully
I
they come
saw the
back.
suggestion of
Hopefully
a
they reseed and
soap.
they come back for you.
Yeah, all right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of other suggestions in the chat, maybe trying soapy water. Yeah, so then they will be back.
Yeah.
Yep. There's also some suggestions about how to site prep using solarization, which is the plastic and cardboard mixture with wood chips. Um, they linked Basil's article from Leaf and Limb on that as well, commiserating about voles and deer as challenges to native plants. I mean, we're feeding wildlife.
Yes, that's what I keep telling myself. I'm like, if the deer love it, I'm supporting wildlife. But it does hurt my heart when I spend $200 and then it gets eaten all in one night. So probably hurts my wallet more than anything else.
Indeed. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. Does anyone else have a question they would like to raise their hand and ask, or go ahead and unmute yourself or type it in the chat and I can read it out.
Hi, can you hear
Hi.
me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm interested. I've got 6 acres and I'm in Hayes, and I'm actually interested in starting a nursery growing natives, both well, shrubs, trees, and flowers. So I was wondering if you have any suggestions, any information, any contacts, who you use for your plants, et
Sure.
cetera, et cetera.
One of our favorite suppliers is Mellow Marsh Farm. They are out in Siler City area. One of my favorites there. We've got a lot of like little local nurseries, and even the nursery industry in general is actually kind of trending towards providing more native plants. A lot of, at least I know on the development side of things, a lot of jurisdictions are requiring native plants as part of their projects now. And so that native plants are becoming a more priority. I will say I have heard, if you're interested, I would recommend you attend the Green and Growing conference that is in, I believe it's in the Winston-Salem area. It's usually around the January, February timeframe every year. That is a conference that is dedicated towards landscape contractors, the nursery industry, and really informative on, or for me at least, kind of the challenges that come from the nursery industry. Growing native plants is a challenge.
Challenging, right?
A lot of native plants, they take a long time to grow, and so they are not necessarily profitable for the nursery industry, if that makes sense. So
Right. And
that
what
was a good education on my point, or my side of things, kind of understanding the challenges from the nursery side.
And what was the name of it? The Green what?
Green and Growing. It looks like someone put that in the chat.
Green and Growing.
Great conference. Great
Okay.
place to make contacts. Kind of a rough and tumble conference, which I love going to those. I don't have to dress up.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Sounds
But yeah,
interesting.
it's a relatively cost-effective conference to go to.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Asked if we'll be sending out the presentation slides, and yes, I will be sending them out.
Yep, I'll shoot the PDF over, and if anybody has any, specific things that they want to touch base with me on, I'm happy to have a sidebar conversation with anybody.
Great, thank you. Jennifer's offering native seeds to anybody that would like some. She's like got a whole list in the chat if people are interested. Another recommendation to join the North Carolina Native Plant Society. That they've got lots of great resources as well. All right, best time to plant natives.
Let's see. The most successful time for plants is going to be in the fall time. That is when plants start to go a little bit more dormant. So the fall is nice and warm. They can start to establish their roots. They go into a dormant period over winter, and then usually springtime is when they flourish. I will say that you have cool season plants and you have warm season plants. So your cool season plants might actually install a little bit better in the spring. And your fall season plants, you might find them a little bit more locally available around fall time. So general rule of thumb, fall is the best time. Spring is the second best. Summer, you can do it. And I have been known to dig up plants and move them in the middle of July and August. You just know that you got to water them and baby them a little bit during that time frame.
And fall is definitely the best time to spread native seed as well. So
Yes.
yeah, seed or planting, that's
Yes.
your best time.
Seeds, I believe, and someone who, I saw Dan on the chat. Hey, Dan, he works with Leaf and Limb. He may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the best time to do native seeds is actually in February. Because then it's before some of the noxious grasses and weeds are starting to grow. So yeah, someone may be able to correct me on that, but I believe
Yep,
February.
exactly right.
Yes. Okay, awesome. Hey, Dan.
January. Hey. Yeah, January,
yeah.
February is when we do all our herb planting, tree shrubs, and seeding for our prairies.
Yep. Perfect. Thanks for confirming that.
Awesome. Do you have any suggestions for understory or ground cover plants that will survive in under large mature maple trees?
Oof. Let's see. Gonna test my plant knowledge here. Depends on how shady it is. I love a good fern that goes in there. Carex species are some of my absolute favorites. There are some like, I really would have to understand a little bit more about what your site's doing, whether it's wet or dry, or really truly how much shade is going there. But generally, I would probably lean towards some ferns and some native sedges.
Like a plant. All right, people are asking about seeds. Love it. Awesome. Are there any last questions? I think I've got everybody that put in their name, their email, and their license number. So just last call for anybody that wants that. Hoffman Nursery has some great resources if you're looking for sedges and site conditions.
I love Hoffman, one of my favorite groups. Love their website. They also do nursery tours if anybody's interested in that, and that's also very super fun to go check out how they're propagating all their plants and all the science behind all of it.
Could you repeat for me who has the seeds and how to go about getting them? I missed that.
Looks like that's in the chat.
I've got the hibiscus laevis. It's the native hibiscus. I've got a bunch of seeds for that, and I've got native plants that need to be dug up and thinned out. Oh, I'm giving those away.
I see. Where are you located?
In Durham.
Oh, okay. I'm in West North Carolina. It's a bit of a drive, but
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Thanks
though.
If you want to text, I put my phone number there. If you want to text me, I can mail you some hibiscus seeds.
Okay, well, thank you.
Sure.
I'll do that.
Awesome. And Kristen's in the Asheville area, and she has some native tree seedlings. Alrighty. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. So thank you all for joining us. This was a great presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you everyone
Thank you all
for joining us.
Hope I was a little insightful, give you a little insight into my side of the world. But again, happy to share the presentation so y'all can see a little bit more into those checklists that I had in there that I didn't go super into detail of. But of course, my contact information is there. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to have a follow-up call or follow-up conversation. Yeah, just reach out. Happy to chat.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sarah, very much. I think everybody really got a lot out of it. I could tell just from all the activity on the chat. I don't know if you noticed, but they turned out the lights behind you. So I think you better get out of that building before they lock you in.
My office is like, they're like, get out of here. The cleaning ladies are coming around.
Thanks again. It was a great presentation.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
You.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the time. Bye.
Good
Thank
evening.
you. Have a good night.